This is Wesley Rossler. You're listening to my dad, Sean Rossler, on the Coarse Grind Podcast. Get cooking!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is episode number 56 of the Coarse Grind Podcast. With you, as always, host, creator, Sean Rossler. How is everyone doing today? If you hear a little excitement in my voice, I really, truly can't hide it. Tonight's guest is easily one of the most formative figures in culinary media overall to me, as well as my exposure to this budding art form, aptly named Food Network. I recall the late nights, I want to say it was about 11 p.m. or so, catching him on air out of an early semblance of a studio, an apartment or two in NYC, I believe, hearing the piano music, seeing him present topic after topic in an intelligent, stylish, non-stodgy manner. The BLT episode, in my mind anyway, stands out quite a bit. I remember it all as if it were yesterday, and if just for one brief episode, it will be here now. But enough about my fanboyism. Let's hear a little bit more about our guest. Journalist, television personality, and cookbook author, tonight's guest has covered great food products, restaurants, wines, gastronomic travel destinations, and related subjects for over 25 years. He's written hundreds of articles and contributed hundreds of original recipes to publications such as Gourmet, where he was restaurant critic from 96 to 2000, The New York Times, Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, Harper's Bazaar, Departures, The Wine Spectator, Savour, and Newsday. He's perhaps best known for his work on the Food Network, where he's hosted or co-hosted approximately 2,500 shows. He was co-anchor of In Food Today with Donna Hanover, and host Chef of Taste, a cooking show devoted to teaching the principles of good taste in food and wine. Taste was honored by the James Beard Foundation for Best National TV Cooking Show. He's a sought-after jurist for wine, food, chef, and sommelier competitions, and travels throughout the world writing and lecturing on a wide range of culinary and oenological topics. What else is there to say that hasn't already been said? To me, he is truly the godfather of modern food media. He's a legend. He's beyond an icon to me, and innumerable others, I'm sure of it. And the man has been kind enough to be here with me today. I couldn't feel luckier to have him on, so let's bring him out. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, my guest this evening, one of the most important figures in the history of culinary media, as well as my love of food itself, the one, the only, the legendary David Rosengarten. How are you, sir?
Wow, Sean, I'm fine. You are way too enthusiastic, but thank you. I'm going to have to get you some Szechuan peppercorns to numb you down.
Well, I have to say, in all the gets of all the years, this is one. I have some old DVDs of Iron Chef Japan from when it was on Food Network. A couple episodes would clip about 15 minutes of taste afterwards, and I'm always like, and so to finally land this, and I know you and I joked yesterday on the phone, this has been a while in the making. I really couldn't be more excited to have you on, and honored for sure.
It is excellent to be here. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, sir. So, for folks new to the program, for folks with terrible short-term memories like myself, starters, mains, afters. Starters, we talk about where the guest came from, how they came to be. Mains, talk about where they're at. And afters, a little bit more off the cuff, but hopefully no one's been injured in 55 episodes. I don't foresee that happening today. So, David Rosengarten, without further ado, tell me about where and what you grew up eating.
Interesting that no one's been injured. as I like to say, we go in, we go out, nobody gets hurt.
That's right.
So where did I grow up? Well, I was born in a place called Brooklyn, way before it was cool. And I was there for about 5 years when my parents decided to move to the burbs, kind of the burbs. We moved to Rockaway. I don't know if you know Rockaway, but it's actually part of New York City, but it's right on the beach in the southern part of Queens. And that's where I grew up, really, on the beach. But the important biographical detail, I guess, is that my dad, and this was before we ever started calling people foodies or before people were foodies, in the U.S., but my dad, I always call him the first foodie. He was crazy enthusiastic about food, particularly the ethnic foods of the day. Back then in New York, you either had meatloaf and, grilled went out to a restaurant, and you were likely to have either Chinese-American food or Italian-American food.
Sure.
So that was his world, and he not only took us to those restaurants continually, but he was pretty good at cooking that stuff at home, too. So those were my first cooking loves, and, I'm still wildly enthusiastic about cooking those kinds of things, but I've added about, 63 cuisines to that since then.
Yes, you have. And you hit on a very important point that, back then, foodieism, and I feel it's become, I don't want to say trended or popularized. It has, and it's not all bad, but I mean, that was an interesting time period to be into multicultural cuisine.
Yeah. It really was an interesting time. Sometimes it's, what we have now is so solidly with us that sometimes it's hard to remember exactly what it was like. But truly, when I was a college student and a little bit after, I'm not trying to brag about this, but I was really the only person in my crowd who knew anything really about food. And I had this group of friends. I had a girlfriend who was going to school in Boston, and I'd visit her on weekends, and every Saturday night I would cook, a kind of ethnic dinner for the group of friends there. And these were all cultured, well-educated young people in their 20s, and they'd say to me, well, what are you cooking Saturday night? And I'd say, this Saturday night I'm going to make moussaka. And all these people would go like, What? What is that? I mean, nobody knew anything. It was amazing. And, of course, now everybody knows everything.
Yeah. Well, the age of information, and in one way, again, that's a good thing. But in another way, is it too accessible? So,
well, the downside of everybody knows everything, and, I don't want to sound nasty about this, but everybody knows everything except a lot of them get a lot of it wrong.
Absolutely. No, I understand. I follow you completely. Part of doing this show and part of being in my role, I don't come from necessarily any kind of a culinary profession. I'm an IT project manager and a father of 3. So, but it's always been a love. I came up in a small farm town, and I'll never forget it. It was a field trip, I think in 9th grade, and I got the California roll where everyone else got the hamburger or the hot dog. And everyone kind of eyeballed me like, what the hell are you doing? And I said, no, I think this is good. So
I have to tell you at this point, I have 2 daughters who are now both mid-20s, and they grew up with me, so they grew up with all this stuff. And I always remember with great fondness when they were like, let's say, 5 and 7, people would see them and say, "Oh, such cute little girls! What's your favorite food?" And they'd expect an answer of like chicken McNuggets.
Yep.
But instead, always they said, "Uni."
Oh, wow.
Wow. What is uni? It's sea urchin, usually from Santa Barbara.
No, my oldest will shoot an oyster with the best of them, and it kills my parents.
Yeah,
They're like, that's disgusting. Looking back to that foundation, I think it could probably go without asking, but your greatest culinary influence was probably your dad then? Being that first foodie?
Oh, I would say, in many ways, of course, because the passion came from there.
Sure.
I would say, it depends how you define influence, but I took a trip. So remember, I grew up my whole life, and I'm eating, manicotti and, egg rolls and stuff like that, and the home food. But my dad was not into French food, because back in the day, there weren't that many French restaurants in New York, and they were either too expensive or just like too ridiculous cliche with the red, white checkered tablecloth. So I was able, when I was a college student at 19, to take a trip in January to Europe, and a week of it was spent in Paris. And I have to say that week also really changed my life. I mean, to see that French obsession with food and to taste some of the food, it really changed everything.
Yeah. So between your dad and Paris, that's a nice gamut to run as far as influences go.
There you go. And my dad had never been to Paris, or France, or Europe. But when he and my mom had an anniversary, I think it was their 40th anniversary, I was able to send them both on a trip to Europe, including
What a good son. What a good son. Kids, if you're listening, how many years later, if mom and dad are still married at 40 years,
Europe,
send us to Europe, please. Was there anything in particular your dad made that like just sticks in your mind as the best, as the thing that your heart longs for most?
I'll tell you one in the Chinese vein and one in the Italian vein. So the Italian vein, I mean, that's probably what he did more than anything else. And he just was magic with any combination of pasta, tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and shellfish. So one of my dad's great dishes was shrimp fra diavolo or shrimp marinara. Yes. You don't put the red pepper flakes in. And I just made it last week. I love that, and I kind of like jazz it up. I take the shrimp shells and I put it in the tomato sauce, and I get all that shrimp flavor in there and stuff like that. But also, he loved crabs, live crabs, and he would sometimes bring home like a bushel of crabs and take some of them and kind of cook them down in the Italian tomato sauce with garlic and olive oil. And the flavor of that sauce, of course, you extract all the crabs later before you serve it, but the flavor of that sauce was so insanely crabby. Over linguine, it's like, I don't know, is that my favorite dish in the world? Maybe. And then on the Chinese side, he wasn't as sophisticated, but I remember in the winter we'd be out, playing on sleds and stuff like that, and my dad would be cooking, and then we'd come inside, and he made what they used to serve in Chinese restaurants in New York, something called pepper steak. And what it is like kind of diagonally cut, rather broad and thin pieces of something like flank steak. Yep. And then they get cooked, not stir-fried really, but cooked in a pot with sliced green peppers. Mm-hmm. And then all the usual suspects would go in, soy sauce and sugar and MSG and stuff like that. But it would cook for quite a long time until the steak was tender. Mm. But that deep flavor of green pepper meets beef, I love that to this day in any form.
That's wonderful. So since then, and all your knowledge and all your amazing, incredible capacity, have you been able to replicate it, would you say, or?
That's a good question. Strangely enough, I'd say on the Italian shellfish and tomato side, definitely I can make it taste just like my dad's. I don't want to defile his memory, but no. Dad, forgive me. Sometimes I can make it even a little bit better because shell infusion and all that kind of stuff. Right. I'd say on the pepper steak side, maybe because I've really become interested in very authentic Chinese cooking. I teach it, and I write about it, and so on and so forth. And the dish he made was so inauthentic that, just from a Chinese point of view, that. I don't know. Maybe I don't quite understand it. I've never, I've made it and it's good, but it never has quite the magic of my dad's.
No, and that's just it. And for as many times as I've, come out with that question, there's always this nostalgia piece that, you can come real close and maybe in quality recreate, but historically and emotionally, there's always that little gap.
Yeah,
for sure. For Definitely. Sure. So you have this inspiration, you have this wonderful upbringing with the first foodie ever. You heard it here first, folks. David Rosengarten, his dad was the first foodie. So you have this wonderful foundation.
I'll stand by
that. You have this awesome foundation, and I know that your education didn't even necessarily lean towards food, correct? You had When was the moment that food became more than the pastime and just a love? When was it that it became something more to you?
Well, I'll tell you the key points along the way quickly. When I was in college, which was at Colgate in upstate New York, it was the first time in my life that I was not around New York City and not around all kinds of gastronomic possibilities. Mm-hmm. So I had to cook it myself if I wanted, the kind of food I knew. So that's really where I started to cook, just for survival when I was an undergraduate. But I always lived with a bunch of other guys. Like we had a kind of hippie farmhouse out in the the only thing we demanded of them was help with the cleanup.
Nice.
But, I did that, and then I realized, well, maybe I've got some kind of talent or something. I kept cooking through my 20s while I was mostly a student and working in the theater in New York. I have a theater background also. Finally, I got a doctorate in theater at Cornell, and whenever I tell people that I have a doctorate from Cornell, they say, "Oh, you were at the hotel school." But no, just as you said, Sean, nothing to do with that. I was just in, what was the height of the railing at the Second Globe Theater in 1610. I mean, that's the kind of theater history detail I was studying. And then I got a job right away teaching at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, and there was a store downtown called Mabou that offered cooking classes and sold housewares and all that stuff. And I had a conversation with the woman who ran it, and she said, "Yeah, I bet what you say is true." And she brought me in to teach a class, and then I started to teach. So I probably taught 100 classes there before I left Skidmore. And that's when I knew, but people get enthusiastic, people pay, they definitely seem more awake than the students in the theater history class. And then I had a chance to come back to New York City, which I did, and I said, hey, maybe I'll start trying to write some of this up. And it was a great time because people were getting interested in food, but there weren't very many food writers yet. I caught it just at the right time, and I started sending off articles about food. I sent an article very early on to Gourmet magazine. That it was about, check this out, something that I'm now almost embarrassed by, but it was about balsamic vinegar, because nobody had written about it yet on a national scale, and I came up with 10 recipes for balsamic vinegar and told the story, sent it off, and like a month or two later, I got a check for $1,000. Great, we tested the recipes, we're going to publish it, and, a lot of other stuff like that. This was like about 1984 or so, and suddenly, I'm a writer.
Yeah. And so from writer then to how I came to know you, I'm certain there's some stops in between, but Food Network. How did that happen?
Yep, that was only 10 years after the moment I just told you about Gourmet. So, I was doing a lot of writing and making a living just by being a writer. It was easy to beat the salary that I had as a college professor in those years.
Sure.
And, seriously, I was hired as a full-time assistant professor at Skidmore. You'll never believe what my annual salary was. It was $16,500. That was the annual salary.
In 84?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's crazy. Things have changed.
Certainly.
But anyway, the showbiz stories, like somebody's in the right place at the right time.
Sure.
And of course, they've spent many years preparing to be in the right place at the right time. But I had an agent. This is back in the early 90s. I had an agent who was always working hard to, get me stuff. And he started to urge me to call this guy named Charles Pinsky, who was a TV producer. And I was a little embarrassed. I didn't do it. But I finally called him it was like a early Sunday evening, and I said, Charles, I think we ought to meet, I have some theater background, I do a lot of food, and maybe there's a TV project that we could discuss. And he said, well, I'm going to France tomorrow to shoot 6 months. He said, so I'll see you when I come back. And he said, wait a second, where do you live? I said, I live on blah, blah, blah in Manhattan. He said, hey, that's just a couple blocks away. You know what? I'm going to take a break from packing.
Oh, my God.
I'll come over and say hi. I said, okay.
Oh, my God.
So he comes over, and luckily I had just finished a pilot for WGBH in Boston, a cooking show. And he said, so do you do any TV? And I said, well, I got this pilot hot off the press, and I showed it to him, and he went, you're pretty good on TV. He said, listen, before I leave for France tomorrow night, I'm having lunch with a guy named Maurice Schoenfeld. Do you know who that is? I said, no. Well, he's starting this thing called the Food Network. Have you heard about it? No. Would you mind if I, mention you to them? And I said, no. And then later the next day I get a phone call. Is this David Rosengarten? Did you meet with Charlie Pinsky yesterday? Yes, I did. The tape that you showed him, could you get it to us? I said, yeah, sure. Where do I bring it? So I got it to them. 2 days later, I get a call. This is the Food Network. Would you be able to meet on West 57th Street at 4 o'clock? And I went, yeah. So I go there. There's a woman standing in front. And I said, is this where, is the Food Network here? She said, well, they're in a studio. My name is Donna Hanover. I don't know if Sean, if you know who that is, but
yes.
She was about to become the First Lady of
Yep.
New York. She was
Yep.
married to Rudy Giuliani, and Reese hired Donna to do a kind of news show as a flagship show for the station, and they needed a guy who knew food and could talk to the camera. So I was there for an audition, and Donna and I talked for 2 minutes in front of the camera. It's like, hey, Donna, what'd you have for lunch today? Well, I had a tuna salad sandwich. It was actually very good. We do that, and then Reese himself comes, who had started CNN. He comes walking out of the darkness. He goes right over to Donna, shakes her hand, and says, well, we found our co-anchor. And nobody said anything to me. I'm just sitting there like, what? And they spoke to my agent, and a day later I had a contract for 2 years to do this show every day.
That is the coolest. I can't. I have to step back as host for a minute and just realize that the late nights of watching you, I just heard the story of how it happened from you. That's magic right there. Oh my God. I'm sitting here grinning so hard my face hurts. But to hear that and to realize what it is now, I mean, that's why, and, I know people will be like, oh, Emerald, or, oh, Batali. But for me, honestly, like, you were the foundation of the new guard. I grew up with, like, Martin Yan, Justin Wilson, Julia Child on public television. Then there was a gap. There was this gap, and then it was you. It was that studio, and it was Taste, for sure.
That's very nice of you. Well, I have to say something funny about the early years and about Julia. I knew Julia by that time. Not very well, but, she knew me, I knew her. And as I was shooting my first cooking show ever, the first Taste, and the subject was bruschetta, we're prepping, I'm putting things on the counter, all the, it's dark in the studio except for a couple of theatrical lights that are on, and I see the door opening, and I see what looks like a very tall woman, slightly hunched over, walking into the studio, and who is walking over to me right before my first cooking show ever? Julia. She was there for a tour of the studio, and she comes walking over to me, and as I said, she knows me. She goes, "Whoa, David, hello." Said, "Well, hi, Julia." And she said, what are we making? And I said, well, we're making bruschetta. Well, what are you going to do? So I said, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to put this in the oven. And then through the magic of TV, and she explodes, and she goes, I hate that phrase, magic of TV. It's bullshit.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it was funny. It kind of got me pumped up. Got me off to a good start.
I don't know how you could get off to a better start in any way. That might be the top draw. So
yeah.
So Taste does his thing. 8 years. You co-hosted. And then what? Then where did you go?
After, the Food Network was going in a whole new direction, so we parted ways, and that would have been about maybe 2001 or 2 or somewhere in there. The Food Network, you know what's going on today. I don't want to publicly say anything bad, but it's different. I mean, it used to really be about food, and then they decided, we should be about reality shows, competitions, all that kind of stuff.
Understood.
And yeah, so, okay, well, I've got a lot of fans now, and I've written a couple of books. I wrote the, really a good book, the Big Store Dean and DeLuca. So I wrote the Dean and DeLuca cookbook with about 500 of my recipes in it, and so I'm an author and all this kind of stuff. So, I took a good hard look at it, and I figured out what I could do next, and I'm still in the TV game, I'm still, to this day, pitching shows and making pilots and stuff like that, but basically I went back to being what I was before, which is a food and wine writer, and it's just about those years, the early aughts, that I started my newsletter, which was the Rosengarten Report.
Yep.
And I was lucky to find a sponsor, a newsletter company just outside of Washington, D.C., who took me on, financed the whole thing, paid me a big salary to do it, and that ran for quite a while. That ran for something like 7 or 8 years, and we got lots of subscribers. We got, subscribers,
Wow.
which really brings it up there,
Yeah.
And then 2008 came, and they went bankrupt, and then, I'm a freelancer, like, life has its ups and downs.
Sure.
So after that, I finally settled in with another sponsor with whom I formed a company, and we finally did revive the Rosengarten report at some point, and probably the business of that company was spreading the degree of my celebrity. People knew me, but we spent a lot of time trying to make even more people know me. And why would we want to do that? Because then we could sell more stuff.
Sure.
So at that point, I was working very hard to identify products that we might sell. I had some incredible products. Like, I found this chili pepper farmer in Virginia who was a madman in a good way, about bringing in esoteric chilies from all over the world to his farm in Virginia, growing them and making what is the best hot sauce I've ever tasted out of those chilies. So that, and I also became a wine importer and started to travel Europe mostly to find great wines that go with food that weren't being imported into the U.S. So there was that whole segment. And now, that was a couple of years ago, but now my main job, and if you don't mind, Sean, I'll tell you about this thing I'm doing, but it's really great. Somehow the universe reached out and found me to work on this. Way back when I was doing the Food Network, we used to do live cooking events on Sundays, usually, around the country. Like a bunch of us, Bobby Flay and Mario and I, we'd get on a plane and go to Dallas Saturday night, and then all day Sunday in Dallas, we'd be at a convention center, and we'd be doing cooking demos, and, 1,000 people would come to see us and pay and stuff like that. The guy who arranged all that was a very talented guy named Rich Gore, who became my friend over those years, and I hadn't spoken to him in quite a while, but we sort of reconnected recently, and I found out that he's starting a new company that's basically dedicated to doing that again, live cooking events, but nothing to do with the Food Network. The idea, this thing is called Flavored Nation. And the idea is that we at Flavored Nation are going to select the top iconic dish in every one of the 50 states. Then we're going to find a chef in each of the 50 states who's really good with that dish. And then we're going to bring these 50 chefs together at a big event called Flavored Nation, where people can buy tickets and watch a weekend of cooking demos. The first one is going to be in St. Louis in late October, and if all goes well, we'll be producing 6 of those shows across the country every year.
Wow.
Same premise, this is all about the iconic dishes of the U.S.
Yeah, and I'm checking out your Facebook page right now, Flavored Nation. Folks, if you want to find it, Flavored Nation on Facebook. I'm checking it out right now. A taste of every state. It looks amazing.
It's such a good idea. I'm having so much fun. One of my jobs at the moment is to get the iconic dishes straight from all the 50 states. That takes talking to people in the states, seeing what they think, and then also to find the chef. So, Sean, right now, and for probably 6 weeks now, I'm on the phone every day with people from all over the U.S., from states I've never talked to before, and it's great. My phone lights up. I go, oh, look who's calling. Boise, Idaho. Look who's calling. Honolulu. And it's really fun. I'm really enjoying it. Some states are easy, and some states are hard.
Yeah, that really has to be gratifying, too. Just being able to do something that new, that fresh. I mean, that exciting. It sounds exciting.
And the kind of cosmic part of it is like, I couldn't think of a better kind of job for somebody like me with my skill set and my experience.
Sure.
And how do you get lucky enough to find the kind of job that matches your skill set? But there you go. It just happened just a couple of months ago. Falls
into your lap. Hey, if you ever need a podcast host or something, you know where to call.
Okay, I do, definitely.
Cool. So, the whole Flavored Nation concept, it brings to light, food in general. Obviously, there are trends, there are ups, there are downs. What trends do you see in dining, in culinary activities, in just cooking overall, that you think are going to culminate in the next big thing? Do you see something coming that we should be aware of?
Yeah, it's a very confusing time. I really do think that, you like to think that you're in the middle of a narrative and something's unfolding all around you and you're a point in the center or something in the continuum. I think this is an era of great confusion. And I don't really know where it's going to go next, but let me tell you a couple of reasons why I think that. First of all, we went from a country where really nobody cares about food too much to a country where, thanks in large part to the Food Network and to social media and all these various modern things, where a lot of people care and a lot of people care passionately. And that's not just in the big cities, that's not just on the coast. I mean, that's really all over the place. Mm-hmm. Well, what does that add up to? I don't know. Can the restaurants handle it? I mean, after all, it's not France, where you've got like sort of an infrastructure of amazing restaurants, both fancy and not fancy, all across the country, who continue to do what they've always done, maybe modify it a little bit for modern tastes. But it's a totally different game in America, where we don't have that basic infrastructure, and a lot of people are trying to figure out, well, what do we got to cook to get people in here? So there's a lot of experimentation going on. I'd say more than anything, what we've landed at right now are restaurants, and certainly the majority of Americans don't go to these, but what's sort of happening in a way in the food world are restaurants where a chef, very often in the vicinity of 30 years old or 35 years old, very often a chef who did a stage or worked for a while, with some famous chef at some very expensive restaurant. He's gone populist. He's like, hey, this is not real food for real people. People can't afford this. So with his wife or his business partner, he opens a restaurant, and it's got, the food is, there's no way to describe it, but there's no way to name it, but I describe it as, basic French technique, local American, or at least American, but hopefully local ingredients, and then with touches from international cooking. And if you think about it, almost every hot new restaurant everywhere today, unless it's a straight-out ethnic restaurant, does exactly that, those three things.
I was going to say, you're describing about half of the restaurants I just ate in the past 30 days, so...
Right.
Yep.
Right. And that way, I don't even know. Where do you live, Sean?
I live in central Pennsylvania, actually, not too far from you.
Okay. Okay, and so you're not even talking about going to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. You're talking about, like, around Harrisburg or something,
Yeah, but actually 2 weeks ago, we were in Pittsburgh on business, and we ate at two different places, and you just described them right there, plain as day.
Yep, this is happening everywhere. Now, is it good? Sometimes it's good. Sometimes the chef is not really supremely talented, and he's just echoing a sort of style. There's very many parts of what people have seen over the last 20 years on the Food Network comes into it. These are people who were trained not by growing up and eating wonderful things that in their adult lives they go on to reproduce, but these are people who are, many of them, sort of making it up based on what they saw on TV when they were 12.
Sure. Yep.
That's why I say it's an interesting, confusing time. I've no doubt that it's all headed in a good direction. But one of the things that is definitely good is, I think, fancy restaurants have definitely taken a hit in every way. They don't get the worship anymore that they used to get, exactly, especially if they're not keeping up. Like, look what happened to, about the thing that happened to Tom Keller, per se, about a year and a half ago.
Yep.
He's always been the one of the very most respected chefs in the world, and he got a devastating review from the New York Times, knocked down from 4 stars to 2 stars, changed the way a lot of people think about, the real fancy restaurants. And, nobody's got enough money to go to them anymore.
Yeah.
I would say that there's a very healthy backlash against pretense and financial over-the-topness. It's very healthy in general. I think it's going to lead to good things.
No, yeah, definitely. I think we, in our age of knowledge, the knowledge that we have, we want the quality, but we want it without the pretense, because we realize that pretense isn't necessarily part and parcel of the deal. if that makes sense.
Yep. Exactly. And for me, this started some years ago. You know, I used to go to France in the early days when I was going to France, let's say in the 80s. And, oh, man, I would book in, and, of course, the dollar was really strong then against the franc. I would book in, you know, like a 2-star restaurant for dinner and a 3-star restaurant. Lunch 2-star, dinner 3-star. And I don't know how I could keep that up for 10 days, but I did, and it's what I wanted to do. And then slowly I started to realize, oh, no, if I go to this little bistro in Reims for a roast chicken and have a bottle of Beaujolais, that's going to be even better and even more exactly like France. So I started to discover that, you know, the bistro food became even more exciting to me than the other food. And that's the way it is today. I'll tell you the truth. If you take me, usually drag me kicking and screaming, to a really important 3-star kind of restaurant 100 times, I would say 95 out of 100 times I'm disappointed. Sure. Maybe 5 out of 100 will go, oh man, this is worth it. But that's not a very good percentage.
No, that's not at all.
While we're on the subject, I should tell you that there is one guy in New York who I would go to his restaurant anytime, under any conditions, if I could afford it. But I don't know if you know about him, because he doesn't get, like, monstrous press, but his name is Cesar Ramirez. His restaurant is called Chef's Table at Brooklyn Fair. He used to be in Brooklyn. He recently moved into Manhattan. I can't believe the non-press this guy gets, but Michelin, I went there once, like, you know, 7 or 8 years ago. Somebody took me, screaming and kicking, and, you know, I was like, yeah, right, and I'm sitting there, and this thing comes out. I remember it's just like a glass with a warm raspberry beet soup in it, and I took it up to my lips, and I went, oh my God, we have to pay attention to this.
Nice.
The rest of the meal came, and I walked out of there babbling about this guy, how great he is. And within a couple of months, he had a star from Michelin, even though it was a crummy little place with zinc. I mean, it didn't look like anything zinc top. And then a year later, he got 2 stars from Michelin. And then a year later, he got 3 stars from Michelin. It was the quickest rise of any 3-star restaurant in the history of Michelin. It was in Brooklyn. And, you know, things have changed a little bit, but the quality of what he does has not changed. So if you have anyone who's looking to pop a lot of money on a big dinner in New York, that's what you want. Chef's Table at Brooklyn Fair, now in Manhattan. His name is Cesar Ramirez, a guy from a Mexican family who grew up in Chicago.
Love it. Cesar Ramirez, Chef's Table. Excellent recommendation, sir. Moving on to the afters. A little bit off the cuff, a little bit fun. Go with me. Like I said, no one's been hurt yet, as we mentioned. If I'm standing in your kitchen, and let me just imagine that, if I will, standing in a kitchen with David Rosengarten for a minute. Okay, I'm good.
I do it all the time.
What music do I hear?
Oh, well, that's interesting. So this enables me to give you my quick rap about music. And the easy answer, so just give you the easy answer. If there's going to be music, probably going to be very loose improvisational jazz.
Excellent.
And I don't even usually know who the artist is or whatever, but, you know, I got the right radio station that just keeps playing the things I want to listen to. You know, very interesting about music. I grew up sort of drenched in music, like I grew up drenched in food. My dad was a huge music lover, and particularly opera, and particularly Wagner. The hours that I was, you know, forced to put the headphones on and sit there were immense. And my brother took it and ran with it. He's now a music professor at a state college in New York. For me, I developed, because I've always listened so much to music, I started to realize some years ago, I don't know, I'm not perfectly good with this, and I didn't know why. And then I realized that music, for me, since it really is important to me and always has been important to me, it changes my emotions.
Yes.
It's like a drug. When I listen to a certain kind of music, I could be having a very happy day, and all of a sudden I'm sad because of the music, or vice versa.
Sure.
And I started to realize, like, you know what? I don't want that messing with my head on a regular basis. That's, like, too powerful.
Yes.
And so I tend to keep the music off.
Oh, okay. All right. No, that works. I follow you completely, actually.
You know who, I have a famous predecessor in this thought. The guy who's like a bad guy in a lot of ways, but the old Greek philosopher Plato, when he developed his Republic, he was going to ban music. Just for those reasons, because it affected the public too easily. Wow. Just like a Trump rant.
Yes. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Okay, so hypothetical situation. Question 2. Hypothetical. You're going to be stranded on a deserted island, and you can only bring 3 foods or drinks with you. What would they be and why?
Right. Well, and getting around the question of, like, you know, storage, like, should I bring something that's going to last me 3 months? So, you know, we're not going to worry about that.
We can keep it fictitious, yeah.
Could we amend the bring with me to slightly? There's a small airplane that flies it in whenever I want it.
You're David Rosengarten. You can do whatever the hell you want right now, okay? Yes.
Well, I would say that sometimes a variation of that question. You asked the desert island question. They used to have a radio show in England where they did the desert island answer for so many things. But there's also the last meal question, which is related. And what I would say for last meal, and we can convert this to the desert island question.
And I'll tell you what, I'll jump in there real quick. That was actually the next question based on Melanie Denea's My Last Supper. So we can do a package deal here.
Yeah, well, let's do them together.
Okay.
But I love oysters. I love starting a meal with a big platter of oysters. The more the better. I hate to have to think specifically in terms of numbers. I hate ordering 6 oysters. I just like, oysters, all right? I'll just keep eating till I'm done.
Just keep bringing them.
Yeah, just keep bringing them. So that could happen on the desert island. And, of course, other cold shellfish, either raw or cold, is great for me as well. Main course time, I would probably have, and we could have this on the island, an enormous platter of sausages. I like the way they do it in Alsace, so they serve it with very fine-cut sauerkraut that's delicious. Chukrut. So, well, of course you can see I've got shellfish, I've got pork. I'm Jewish, of course. And then to round things out, you know, I always think of wine in 2 ways. One, there's wine that, just drink it, don't worry about it. You know, it's like really delicious stuff, goes well with a lot of foods. Yeah. So on that side of the equation, particularly for the oysters, I like really crisp, dry, low-alcohol whites. So that puts us anywhere in the range of like a good Village Chablis, a good Muscadet. Even, I love dry Rieslings from Germany.
Yes.
As long as they're, I mean, I like the ones with sweetness too, but for this kind of use, dry is great. So that's the simple side of things. Then, if I were to be on this desert island for a long time, I would definitely have to have a supply of some really wonderful wine that I could, you know, I could pull from that supply every once in a while. And there's no doubt for me that the greatest wine in the world, strange as it seems to go on record as saying that, but aged red Burgundy.
Yes.
Oh, my God. I mean, it just makes wine lovers weak at the knees. And, you know, it's interesting because we always think of it as, oh, this stuff is so sexy. You know, there's actually a scientific connection there. They have discovered that there's something in aged red Pinot Noir from Burgundy that is related to a chemical that's in human pheromones.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. So it's like, whoa, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense because I've like you, sir, I've lusted after some good full-bodied, dry, old reds. Like there's no tomorrow. Oh my God. I
mean, the problem in the U.S., just on a related subject, I like red wine when it's really simple and fruity and young. You know, like I love Beaujolais. It's great stuff. But I also love, even more, frankly, the expensive stuff that's very old and has really developed amazing layers of flavors over the years or the decades. The problem is that in the U.S., most wine shops have neither one nor the other. If you go into a wine shop to buy a red wine, you'll usually find something right now, let's say from 2013, that's still got a lot of tannin in it, doesn't have the charm of young fruit, doesn't have the complexity of age. It's just kind of meh, yeah.
Yep.
And that's what most people have to drink because that's what's for sale.
No, absolutely. And, you're from New York, come down here to Pennsylvania where we have to go to state-run stores to get it. That's just an added insult.
Did I hear somewhere that law might change?
It already is changing. Currently, grocery stores can carry, and gas stations are working on it too. So here's hoping.
That's good for you.
Here's hoping, indeed. And finally, then, the last question, sir, the simplest and perhaps the most complex. What is food to you in a single word?
Looking for that one correct word. I think the word is sensuality.
Sensuality. I love it.
I've been involved in the theater very heavily. I'm a huge lover of the arts in all kinds of ways. I like stuff that appeals to your senses, and that's probably it. The food has flavor and all that kind of stuff, which is all obviously on the sensual side. But then there's that whole thing that I learned to savor in Asia, the texture of food. Like you just put it in your mouth, your eyes roll, and then close. And, it's interesting. I've been told, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've been told that the French word for palate is exactly the same word as the French word for palace.
Wow.
They're likely to say something, your palate, it is your palace.
Oh, my.
It is your royal place.
That explains a lot, that's for damn sure.
Yeah.
Well, sir, I have to say it again, Mr. David Rosengarten, thank you so much for being with me today, man. I appreciate it more than you can know.
Wow. It took us a while, Sean, but I tell you, it was worth getting here because you're really good to talk to. I appreciate your niceness and your great questions.
I am going to have a hard time getting my head out of my office. Before I let you go, Flavored Nation on Facebook, be sure to check it, like it, keep watching it because I think it's going to be awesome. It's going to be huge. All right, there, I did it. Trump reference. DRosengarten.com. You can find everything David Rosengarten on Amazon, specifically the Dean and DeLuca cookbook, which a friend of mine, Chef Gary Vatican here in town, told me to tell you he loves and adores. It's his favorite ever. And again, Flavored Nation on Facebook. And thank you so much again, David. I appreciate it.
Sean, let's try to keep it to just 3 months from now. Let's try to talk again sometime soon.
I'd love that.
Like 3 years from now.
I'd love that. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been episode number 56 of the Coarse Grind Podcast. Again with me has been the legendary David Rosengarten. My producer, as always, has been Johnny Leland Robinson, the Reverend Johnny Lamoria. Be sure to check him out at Fringe Fest in Scranton coming soon. And next episode, number 57, we're going to be taking it back to the home of my Steelers and Penguins. Stay tuned.
Retour sur son fin tour.